A game with a solid single-player campaign makes for good entertainment. This is not one of those games. Let's look at 4 broad points Shadow Warrior 2013 does wrong.
Goddamn right. You got the power!
The tone is all over the place in Shadow Warrior. It jumps from dick jokes to melodrama with no grace at all, and it does neither the comedy nor the drama well. Some games are on the whole serious, but there are humorous moments, humor that comes from the characters inhabiting these serious situations. It humanizes them, adds depth to their character.
Now, pick your characters.
Other games are lighthearted on the whole, but serious moments happen and the grim coexists with the funny, creating a dark undercurrent throughout. Shadow Warrior is neither. There's an inconsistency. The drama and the comedy don't operate well together because the components themselves operate poorly. It establishes itself as mindless laughs and shooting, minus the laughs. There's nothing unfunnier than someone trying desperately hard to be funny. You've got a snarky, wisecracking main character, and a snarkier, wisecracking demon sidekick, and one-liners delivered by fortune cookies lying around. As the game moves forwards, the story stumbles into drama and lands on its face. These dramatic moments have no gravity as the game has done nothing to get the player to feel anything for these characters, let alone take them seriously. The stakes get raised, but the player isn't invested, so any loss isn't felt. Everything about this game is bland. The enemies, the environments, the combat scenarios it places the player in, all bland. The standard enemies are fodder easily made into mincemeat, and the more colorful enemies don't fare much better. On normal difficulty, none of the enemies pose much of a threat. As the game goes on, they just throw more waves of them at the player. Quantity over quality. The limited patterns and artificial intelligence of the enemies results in limited mental input from the player. Dealing with Shadow Warrior's foes isn't terribly engaging, which is a problem since dispatching enemies is the player's primary interaction with the game. The player's arsenal is varied due to a progression system that adds combat functions and alternate fire modes for weapons, but 90% of the combat scenarios can be won just using the sword. Take away the textures and all the environments are corridors and rectangular rooms. Varied terrain goes a long way as it might have a player rethinking how they use their toolset in a situation, but there's nothing to rethink or even think about in the first place. Usually different arrangement of enemy types and different environmental layouts keep combat scenarios fresh, and it has the player fighting in different ways to deal with the scenario at hand. But since the enemy types are few and not interesting to begin with, and the environments are all flat variations on the rectangle, there's really no room for rearrangement. From start to finish, you're doing the same thing in the same place, and it's just as bland at the beginning as it is in the end. Shadow Warrior drags on. This ties into the problem of lack of variety. It played its hand, it's not impressive, and it refuses to cash out. There's a point in the game where you confront who seems to be the penultimate boss. You've been working your way to face the protagonist's former employer, there's build-up. And then you fall through the floor and have to make your way through 2 tedious levels to confront him again. And when you make your way back to him, the confrontation happens through a cutscene. That example is a microcosm of the game. There's promise of something interesting, then it withholds you from it, and you work your way through long, tedious levels and combat scenarios, finally getting somewhere that's actually nowhere and there's no payoff. Stretching out a game the way Shadow Warrior does wouldn't be a problem if the moment-to-moment action held up, but the game is longer than it is interesting. Let's bring the focus tighter on the pacing of moment-to-moment playtime. We've already covered that combat scenarios are not interesting, but between them, there are long stretches of nothing, walking from point A to B. Well, not nothing. There are chests and cabinets with coins and cash for upgrades, and the pace, both narrative and gameplay, is ruined and momentum is lost, while scavenging around every corner for currency. This sort of pacing by scavenging works in some other games because the world is rich and compels the player to do so. The world and environments of Shadow Warrior offer the player nothing. This one's self-explanatory. Sure, it got patched out later, but a bug like this should have been fixed before release. With Hard Reset and Shadow Warrior, I really want to like developer Flying Wild Hog with the neo-90s shooter spirit and design philosophy they put into their games, but they just can't execute on a fun game.